Yep.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, well, thanks very much. Susan's not here anymore, but she didn't butcher my name because, to be quite honest, I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced anyway. But yeah, so I'm Chris Mayes from Fathers Network Scotland, and today this is what we're going to be looking at. Why getting dads involved in their children's learning is a good thing. If we know it's a good thing, what's stopping it from happening? What are the barriers to getting dads engaged in school activity and in the learning of their children? We may hear from Preston Pan's infant school, but depending on technology, we may not hear it today, in which case we'll share that case study with you. And we're going to finally look at why right now especially is a great time to engage dads. The Scottish Book Trust are going to talk to us a little bit once we've done our bit about some of the things that have inspired them and some practical ideas around getting dads involved. And they did quite a lot of work and continuing to do quite a lot of work during sort of lockdown circumstances. And we'll be sharing their insights from what they've learned during that period. And then, of course, there will be a chance for everyone here today to ask any questions or share any thoughts on what's been heard today. Over to you, Kathy.
We're having lots of problems with our tech today, but just to tell you a little bit about Fathers Network Scotland, we're often mistaken as a Fathers Justice organisation. That couldn't really be further from the truth. Our raison d'etre really is to improve children's lives and outcomes through the positive involvement of fathers, father figures and families. So this is our founder, David Drysdale, and as you can see from the quote, he was pretty much a feminist actually. And he was inspired to set up Fathers Network Scotland after the birth of his first child, and he wanted to be a really hands-on dad and to be involved with all the aspects of being a dad, right from the perinatal period before his son was born, all the way through his son's life. But what he kind of realised quite early on was that although he wanted to be extremely involved in all the activities around his son, he realised that that society hadn't quite caught up with him, and that mum was still seen as the main caregiver, and that dads were often seen as a bit of an afterthought, and at worst an inconvenience in universal services like nurseries and maternity services and doctor surgeries, and he really wanted to do something about it because he was really wanted to see equality in the home and outside of the home. So sadly, David Drysdale was diagnosed with a really aggressive form of cancer during Year of the Dad, which was happening in 2016, and sadly died before Year of the Dad was finished. But we really do hope, Chris and I hope, that the work that we do at Fathers Network Scotland is very much in line with his thinking. So the work that we tend to do is with professionals, and we think that this taking this approach will have the biggest impact on society. So if we can change the maternity services and schools and nurseries and doctor surgeries and all these places where families interact with dads and mums and children, then actually dads will be more supportive. They will in turn be able to support their children and their families more, and the whole of society will benefit. So I'm going to now hand back over to Chris, who's going to tell you about engaging dad and why it's a good thing.
Okay, so I guess that's the question. Why is, or how do we know that engaging dads is a good thing? I think it's something that we probably all assume is a good thing, but there's a lot of evidence out there, and we'll share the links to the research at the end of the session as well. But let's look at what happens when dads aren't involved. Well, when dads aren't involved with school engagement and the learning of their children, we tend to see higher rates of school dropouts associated with that lack of involvement from a father. In terms of things like bullying, we tend to see more children who are bullied, who don't have that supportive father figure in their lives and in and around their education and learning. And we also tend to see more children who are bullies who don't have that positive and supportive relationship with a father figure. And essentially, children are less likely to enjoy the school experience and have more negative attitudes towards school when more of those children that have those attitudes towards school have less of a supportive relationship with a father figure. Next slide, please. And in the bigger world, teen pregnancy and underage pregnancy is a big issue for us here in Scotland. In fact, per capita, we have more teen and underage pregnancy in Scotland than any other country in Western Europe. And lack of a father involvement increases the likelihood of teenage motherhood. So it's a really important thing for us to consider in relation to that in our country. The absence of a dad can contribute to violent crime as much of an absence of income. If we think about the issues that we've seen in a lot of the inner city areas in England over the past 2 or 3 years, a big increase in violence between young men, and a lack of a father figure and a supportive figure is closely related to most of those young men involved in those violent crimes. And we tend to see a large majority of young men and boys who go through the prison system growing up in fatherless homes. Next slide, please. But on the flip side, on the positive side, what can we do about it? Well, what happens when fathers are involved in their child's learning? Well, essentially, we tend to see improvements in all aspects of a children's or a child's life that we measure. All aspects improved with relation to more supportive father involvement. So children tend to do better in terms of their achievement, their attainment. There are lower exclusion rates associated with supportive father figures. And things such as social mobility and poverty statistics, we tend to associate a supportive father figure with improved aspiration amongst young people. Next slide, please. And in terms of behaviour and relationships, children who spend more time with their father have a greater capacity for empathy, which I guess we've kind of touched on already with relation to young men and the association with violent behaviour amongst their peers and a lack of a father figure. So all of these things together, when fathers are there and are more supportive and are encouraged to be a part of a young person's life, it's a recipe for improved outcomes for children and young people in all aspects of their life and in all aspects of their school life and learning as well. Next slide, please. But that slide here says, why can it seem so difficult to engage dad with school? I think we do all tend to agree, those of us that work in and around education and learning, that it can seem that way. It's more difficult to get dads involved. Unfortunately, it's not just an assumption, it's the statistics bear this out. So let's go on to the next slide. Is it that we often see mums and that our systems and our approaches tend to be set up so that mums are very often the only parent with sole responsibility, not only for childcare, we know that societally that's the case, but in terms of things such as school attendance, performance, how we communicate with parents. It tends to often be the mum as the person who we face in terms of our educational establishments. So next slide, please. So I suppose at this stage, it's important to maybe just take a little bit of a step back and get back to the basics here. What is it we're trying to do as a sort of a collective here in terms of educational organisations and family support networks and so on? we all know and we understand that in Scotland, GIRFEC and whole family approaches, this has been the bedrock of how we should have been and how we should continue to work with children and families. We are asked to continually place children and young people at the centre of our focus with that family around the child. What this approach doesn't tell us is that the gender of a parent is relevant. This approach doesn't tell us that one parent is more or one parent is less important than the other. And so what we can deduce from the way that we work in Scotland is that if a key parenting figure in that whole family is not engaged, then we know that we are risking the most positive outcomes for that child. So it's up to us to determine who that family is. We know this stuff, it's dead basic. But do we often or sometimes decide who that family is, depending on what information, for instance, we collect or what information we don't collect, who we communicate with, who we don't communicate with, and so on. We want to move from deciding to determining who that family is in a systematic way within our education services. So next slide, please. And I'll pass you back to Kathy.
So this is some information that was gathered a few years back as part of a research project that we were involved with. It's actually from the Growing Up in Scotland Longitudinal Research Survey, and that was a survey of around 2,800 families across Scotland. And as you can see, the level of involvement in schools is much higher with mums than it is with dads. So this is across Scotland. And actually, dads participate in 2.7 of the 11 key activities in schools, compared to mums who are active in 5 out of 11. So you can kind of see that borne out in that graph on the left-hand side of the screen. But it's not just about mums and dads. Actually, father's level of involvement is really closely linked to household income. So the higher dad's income is, the more involvement he's likely to have in school. Now, this association doesn't hold true with mums. It's really just an issue with dads. But this has a negative impact on the attainment level. So families most in need of dad's positive impact may not be benefiting from their involvement, and therefore widening this attainment gap that we're seeing in schools and across Scotland. So I'm going to hand back to Chris now, who's going to talk about some of the barriers to dad's involvement in schools. Why is it the case?
Yeah, okay, so the reason that these points are on this slide is simply through research that's been carried out, various pieces of research that have been carried out over the years, and also in terms of our own work, working with people that work in schools, with families that engage with schools. So things such as the times that we engage with parents, which parents we engage with, which parents we tend not to engage with, how we communicate with our parents. Do we lead our systems? Are our systems designed in a way to respond to the needs of GIRFEC and whole family approaches? Or is the way that we work led by our systems? Often it seems to be the latter. Working with staff in primary schools and in early years settings, we all know that it's a traditionally female working environment with a lower proportion of men. Is that an issue? Well, I would say it is an issue in the sense that the staff that we work with tell us and talk to us about a lack of confidence, I guess, in relation to engaging with the parenting figure that I suppose they tend to have less experience of engaging with traditionally. And also from a parental point of view, where Kathy's already mentioned families who are maybe struggling a bit more, will more than likely have parents where they have themselves a negative experience of schooling, and that can be a barrier. And we can go on all day about the barriers and the things that are getting in our way, and from school to school, from area to area, we'll all have our own little particular issues. So what do we do about this? How do we change what we're doing in schools? How do we do more to support and engage fathers? So next slide, please. Well, before we get onto that, it's important to understand that it's not just about what the research tells us. It's not just about what we think as practitioners. It's not even just about what parents tell us. Children tell us that it's really important for them that their dads are involved in schools. Children love it when their dads are involved in what they're doing. They want to tell their dads about what's happening in school. And we've seen that in many occasions when we've worked with schools, most recently working with the East Lothian Schools Project. And this is what the children that we spoke with told us. So next slide, please. So what we're talking about here is a culture shift. This is no mean feat. We're talking about a systematic wholesale change to how we work with families. There is no school, there is no teacher, I am sure, that intentionally excludes any parent. However, if we think about our systems, if we think about our approaches, are we guilty of passively excluding key parenting figures in our child's life? And if we are, then how do we go from passive exclusion to actively including the other key parenting figures in our child's life who are not particularly engaged with their learning and with the work in school? Next slide, please. And the good news is that it's very straightforward and it's very simple. It's all about small changes. I'm sure you're familiar with that language in terms of improvement methodology and so on. We're talking about little changes here and there that can collectively, in any school system or any school setting, come together to have a big impact on how we engage with parents, how we engage with fathers. And I'm now going to pass you back to Kathy.
Well, I'm now going to talk about the Parental Engagement Project that Fathers Network Scotland and the University of Edinburgh, Dad's Work, who are a local community project, and most importantly, Preston Pans Infant School participated in 2016, and we were very lucky to have Scottish Government fund this project, and we'll come on to it later, but you can access all the findings from that Parental Engagement Project and all of the outputs from it from us, so we can pass you on that information. So the Parental Engagement Project started as a result of one dad asking the head teacher of Preston Pans Infant School how she had created such a dad-inclusive school. So he worked with dads, this particular parent, and he was just astonished by how it sort of bucked the trend. So we kind of found this outlier school that where dads were, I wouldn't necessarily say equally as involved in mums, but there's certainly a much higher proportion of dads involved with their children's schooling and involved with the school. And so I suppose the project set to work, try to find out what they'd done so well. So the University of Edinburgh, Fathers Network Scotland, Dad's Work, Preston Pans, we decided to gather knowledge and information from the staff and the dads workers and the parents and the children from around the school, and to research what they've done well. Now, I was hoping at this point to be able to hand over to Alison Cameron, who is the head teacher at Preston Pans Infant. She's now moved on and is at Elphiston Primary, which is literally just down the road from me here. But sadly, she's been taken ill, so she's in her sick bed at the moment. And I'd hoped, actually, to then show you a film of her experience of how she'd made her school so dad-friendly. But unfortunately, we're having a few glitches with our film as well. So what we'll do is we'll send you a link to a YouTube video of Alison Cameron talking about the work she did in Preston Pans Infants. But in short, I will try and whip through what she found out. So fortunately, I've made some notes about the top tips that Alison had found for other schools. So the first one is to make sure that your dads know that your school values them, and you can do that in a myriad of ways. But there are some really, really simple things that you can do. The first thing is to make sure that your school, or it could be a nursery, it doesn't really matter, anywhere where you want schools to be inclusive, is to create a dad-friendly environment. So you have images of positive images of dads with their children, they'll kind of think, okay, well, this feels like a sort of place where I'm supposed to be. In addition, we tend to use parents as a phrase for talking about mums and dads. Actually, you're much better off discussing mums and dads, because parents can often just be seen as mum rather than as mum and dad. So just changing that terminology or that language just a little bit makes all the difference to dads and will make them feel really included. I mean, these are fairly obvious, but the next one is just get to know your dads. It can't be understated, the importance of building relationships. So as dads drop off their kids in the morning, just go up and say hello. You know, you just go and find out their names, how they're doing, just have a quick chat, just so they feel comfortable getting over that barrier, just, you know, crossing the threshold and into the school. The next point is adopting a whole school approach led by the head teacher. So this is really important. So the head teacher's really got to buy into the idea of making their school more inclusive. So if it's modelled right at the top and the staff are trained and they understand what's expected of them, and if you have a champion, particularly in your school, who's really beating the drum for dads, then actually you can change your culture in your school. The next thing is bringing dads together. So finding ways of getting dads involved with schools. So you could ask the children in your school, you could ask the mums that are engaged in your school, what's dad interested in? You know, is he good at tech? Could he help with putting on the play? Could he help in sports? Could we do a Father's Day event? So ask your school community about how would be best to get dad involved. And finally, I suppose this is where Chris and I and Fathers Network Scotland come in, is join a dad-friendly community. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people across Scotland who are dead set on trying to make their services more dad-friendly. And you can access them through us. And you can access a whole myriad of resources through Fathers Network Scotland. So do get in touch with us, and we can find a whole cohort and local people close to you that are all putting dads on the agenda for their organisations. So that was the kind of top tips from Alison. But actually, during the schools project, she set to work with her colleagues and the researchers in developing a practical guide for father inclusivity. Now, again, you can access that through us, but it was based on the How Good Is Our School model, which Education Scotland has put together. So it should seem very familiar with school professionals. And it talks you through, it's basically a tool for self-evaluation as a starting point for your school's improvement. So that is also available. And now I'm just going to come on to why now is a great time. Why is it so important to act now? Well, we're just coming out of COVID. And at Fathers Network Scotland, we tend to do a yearly kind of temperature check of what's happening with dads. And we send out a survey, and we gather information and voices from dads every year. Now, last year was so unprecedented. Obviously, things changed so dramatically that we actually did 2 dad surveys, and we asked the same questions in our survey during the first lockdown and then again in the survey during the second lockdown. And as you can see, dads, as you probably expect during lockdown, dads spent an enormous amount of time with their children, engaging with their homeschooling and playing with them. You know, this is probably about double the amount of time as we previously have encountered with dads. So it's a huge seismic shift in the amount of time that dads are actively engaged with their children. And these are some of the things that Dad told us. So I'll just give you a few seconds just to read through some of these quotes. This is what Dad's told us. So not only that, it wasn't just about dads spending more time with their children. They also wanted to make substantial changes to their lives. They wanted to parent differently as a result of what they've been through with COVID. And what they told us, and this has been replicated in other studies across the UK, is that they wanted to spend more time with their children and they wanted to spend better quality time with their children. And again, this is just some of the things that dads told us during our 2 surveys from last year. So being more engaged with schools, actively seeking new employment so they could spend more time with their kids, being more involved with their children's learning at school. So really, really positive stuff that's come out of a very kind of dark hour for us across the globe. So I'm going to hand you back to Chris, who's going to talk about the next steps.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kathy. I'm just going to jump on to the next slide, please. So, as Kathy mentioned earlier, one of the sort of top tips from Preston Pan's infant school was to take that whole school approach, and that's something that we've been helping some schools and nurseries do over the past few years. We have a training programme that's funded by the Scottish Government, so we can go into schools, nurseries. We also train midwives, health visitors, lots of staff working from the antenatal period right up until the primary school age. Of the staff that we've trained since January 2018, we've trained around about 1,200 people, and the vast majority have. The impact's been really pretty overwhelmingly positive. The impact being that it's helped staff understand the issue. This is why it's important that we get dads involved. Secondly, what are the barriers? Let's identify them. And then lastly, but most importantly, what are the small changes we can make to make that difference? And when we did a sort of a 2.5-year impact evaluation on this year, we could quite clearly demonstrate what schools have managed to do as a result of this training exercise, I suppose, to change their practice, to become more father inclusive, and ultimately to help the children that are in their schools do better, I guess. In terms of how that's delivered, we tend to do it depending on schools and nurseries and anybody else in terms of their availability. So the sessions are bespoke and tailored to whichever establishment it is. We're going into twilight sessions, in-service days, an hour-long input, whatever it happens to be. The other thing that we can do is work with schools, looking at schools' systems, policies, protocols, and so on, and have, I suppose, what we would call a father-inclusive audit, a sort of objective look at how a school operates, and again, what simple, small changes could be implemented to take those little steps forward to making a whole school or a whole establishment become more father-inclusive and father-friendly. That's the end of that slide, Kathy. And we have a number of resources which, if you are interested in any of them, I'll tell you what they are. We have the top tips that came from Preston Pan's infant school that Kathy mentioned. We have the father-friendly school guide based on the How Good Is Our School framework. We are in the process of putting together a more concise version of that that's a bit more off the shelf, I suppose. In terms of information about research and why it's important to get dads involved, all that sort of thing, we have a number of publications that we can share. If you do think that you're interested in getting your hands on any of that stuff, just drop us an email and we shall send you what we have. And here is our information. So that is us, I think, and let's now